Hey students, this is a quick tutorial on how to go about doing 2.4. For this, you will need the 3D Rhino model of what you made your physical model of. So whichever design that you selected, whichever word association, disappear, collide, whichever one, you will use that model for this part. And with this 2.4, we will be setting up our building. We'll be laying it out as if it's a building with top view, elevation views, plans, and sections. You'll be utilizing all of the different views, and the perspective or parallel view will help you to set up these different sections. So let's start with setting up the top view. So top view is the same as an aerial view, which is basically the above bird's eye view of a building. Basically, if you were a bird looking down, what would the top of your building be? For many of you, it might be blank. You might not have subtracted anything from the top. So more than likely, your top view would be a plain rectangle. And that's okay for this point, but you will still need to set it up so that you know how to do it in the future. If you're using Rhino for your projects or in any projects, you will need a top view. So for this, you will select your top view and you will make 2D. Press enter. This window should pop up and you want to make sure that the top is what is selected. View from object, and you want to make sure nothing else is selected. Sometimes this might be selected, but you don't want that to be selected. Hidden lines, because it will show all those lines, all these different lines here that don't show up on the top. That's what will show, and you don't want to see that. So make sure all of these are unchecked, and then you label it top, press OK, and a make 2D of the top view should be in view. You will move it just so that you have it cleaned up and laid out neatly. And delete any excess lines and points. In this case, this cross is unnecessary because it's just part of the polyline surface. Next, we want to set up our elevation views. So elevations are the side profiles of your model. So many of you may have cutouts or subtractions from multiple sides, from these two, some from the back. And what we want to see is you pick two adjacent, which is basically hinged at a point next to each other, and you want to make your elevations those. So one would be your left, so to the left of your screen, and one would be to your right. So for this, our left view is my front view, and my right view will be my right view. Some of you may not have cut out for one of the sides, and you can always change it according to what side you want to showcase, but make sure that they are next to each other for this instance. So if this is our front view, we want to make 2D of this. This is our front. We want to name, although it is named front in Rhino, we want to name it left. So then it should make 2D. In top view, you will type move, and you will move it so that it lines up alongside your top view, and delete excess lines or any of these lines that pop up from just the shape. And that will be our left. And then we will do our right. So highlight, make 2D, right, and then OK. Then move, So now we have our top view, our left, and our right. You can go ahead and label these. More than likely, when you go into Illustrator, you will have to type the text yourself so that there's a uniformity and a neatness to it. But this can help you to know which is which before you get into Illustrator. Alrighty, so we have our first three views: top, left, and right. Our next step is to start making our plan and our sections. So a plan is basically like a floor plan. If you were to cut the building to occupiable space, like first floor, second floor, third floor, how would that look different from the top view, the aerial view? If you were not inside the building, that's what the top view is. It's like, oh, overall, this is what the building looks like. But inside, something else is happening. And that's what we want to showcase with plan views. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut our model horizontally. Plan. Horizontally is plan. We're going to cut our building horizontally so we can see what's happening inside. A nice rule of thumb, at least for this project, is to cut halfway through our shape. But for some of you, halfway through might not show anything. So instead, you will move it to one of the most interesting points in your model. So we're going to use clipping plane. Clipping plane is like a cut. And when we use it, it wants us to set up the first corner of our rectangle. So it wants us to set up the shape to which we are going to cut it. So we want our shape to be along the top. And we've created a square. Nothing happens, and that's fine. We're just setting it up. When we click on it, a clipping plane is now there. And what we want to do, it shows in front view, but we want to see it in parallel right now so we can see what's going on. And since it's plan, horizontal, we want to also see it in top view because that's the view that we're going to use to set up our drawing. So parallel and top view. So when we click on the clipping plane, we're going to type move in our command move. And we're going to move this down. We're going to move this down let's say 3 inches, or until we come to an interesting point in our model. Rhino might start acting up, and that might become very frustrating, completely understandable. One suggestion is to switch your point to which you'll be moving, choosing a different angle to go about it. And if that continues to be an issue, then my next suggestion is to use one of the side elevations and move it from the side. And just look at the parallel so that you can see how far it's going. Follow the edge of the square so that it stays straight, and then you will find a point where you would have an interesting cut of your building. So I can choose between here or here. So I'm going to go with this one since it strikes more of an interest when I cut it. So what you might be seeing now, or what you are seeing now, is that this whole face is now a very solid white with a black outline. This is outline of what we've cut through. And this is important to note because when we are taking this drawing to Illustrator, we are going to poche. Poching is sort of filling in the cut region, the area that is cut. And that's typically black because there is an absence of light in that space that we've cut through. So that's why it's black. So if we make 2D of the top view and keep everything down here unchecked, and we're gonna make this our plan, you can see how it differs from what our original top view was. So highlight, okay, I just confused myself and everybody included because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So we're gonna move it over because it's starting to cause problems. Let's not do that, please. Oh gosh. We're gonna do that again. So from here, we're going to now make 2D of this and bring it here. I'm gonna shift it over so that it doesn't cause any problems later. You might find that you don't need to shift it over, but I've had moments where when I make the section cuts and I try to move it over, it comes into a little issue, so I move it over just for precaution reasons. If you find that you run into an issue, undo, move your model over with the clipping plane, and then try again. Make 2D, top view, plan, and then okay. So it appeared here, so I didn't have to move it over, but I will keep it there just for myself. So what you might notice that your clipping plane also got selected. So to quickly fix this, press Escape before you click anything, and then go back and just highlight your plan and then move that. So the clipping plane is no longer selected. What I just did was I highlighted the corner of plan. So without it highlighted, I'm kind of eyeballing where to place it. When I highlight that corner, it turns white first and then it turns blue and creates this sort of white guideline that I could follow to help me to place so that it's aligned with my top view. And then I will take my text and I will label this plan. A good rule of thumb is to use all caps. It's the architectural lettering. So I'm going to do the same thing once again, but for my front left and my right view. Let me clean these up real quick. I will look at the top of my parallel to make sure of where the extra lines are. So there's an extra line here that shouldn't be there. So we're going to get rid of that line. And then there's also an extra line here that shouldn't be there. So that is So I should have this and this. So this is an extra line that does not need to be there. Yep, there we go. Now we're gonna do this again. We're gonna click on the clipping plane, but we're going to uncheck everything. When we do that, it reverts it back to normal, but the clipping plane remains. This is just so that it stays there. You don't lose it, but you can keep working on different things without it interfering. So we're gonna make a new clipping plane, but we want to use it to help us make sections. Sections are the vertical cuts through buildings or objects to showcase what's inside between levels. Plan was just an individual floor. Section helps to see different levels. We might be working with just one cube right now, but with all the different areas we subtracted, we want to showcase what the inside of our imaginary building looks like. So to do that, we would do clipping plane, but before we click, we're going to click on vertical because we want it to be on the face rather than the top. So vertical, click, and go across the top line. And this helps to identify the face that we want to cut through. So we're starting off with, this is the right side. So I actually want the left. I want to go in order so that I'm not confusing myself. So before I click, I'll press escape and just do that command all over again. Clipping plane, vertical, and I want it on this side. Click, highlight the top to identify the side, and then cover the side. Uh-oh, what happened? It's okay. If this happens to you, that's perfectly fine. Basically what Rhino did was it created a section cut for you, but it went in the wrong direction. So it wanted to cut this way as opposed to this way. So it's a quick fix. You click on the clipping plane, and this flips the direction that it cuts. So we want to flip it so that our shape comes back, and we want to start cutting in that direction. So we click on the clipping plane and we will type move. You can do this in the 3D view if it allows you. If it doesn't, you can, so for me it's working very smoothly. However, if for any reason it doesn't work that way, since we're cutting from the front, we will use the right to help us set up our clipping. So if we use right and do move, oh, whoops, make sure this is selected. So if we go, okay, and then move, we can use this line to help us set up our section. So for here, I found a good cutting part to be here because it showcases a very, not so much complex, but interesting moment within my building. So if I was to orbit this, you'll see this is something you wouldn't tell was going on if you were just looking at it from just the elevations. So I want to showcase this moment. So right now, it's only showing in parallel, and I want it to show in front because that's how I pushed it. So we're going to click front, and now this matches what I did in parallel. So the next step is highlight, make 2D, front, section A, and this is section It's just like when you create 3D text, you'll only see what you can. So if the floor is here, you wouldn't see that angle, but you would see this one, and you would see that one. This is basically what we're trying to create, a three-dimensional effect to our 2D drawing. So from here, we will use the black arrow, selection tool, and we're going to come here to Window and open Pathfinder. Pathfinder is something that will help out for those who aren't quite skilled yet with creating individual shapes on their own. You can use Pathfinder to help join multiple shapes so it creates one. Much like in Rhino, the Boolean union, the Boolean difference, it's much like that. This one unites it and this one minuses it. Difference. So uniting makes it one shape so that when we fill it with a stroke, effect, window color. So now when we fill it with a color, we fill it with black. When we fill it with black and change the opacity, it functions as one shape. If we were not to do that, if we left it as it was and then tried to fill it with black and then change the opacity, you'll see where it overlaps. So if it overlaps, you can do it in this phase also. Highlight, and it will create one shape once you've united the two shapes. And you would do the same thing here. You want the inside fill to be black. And you want the opacity. And then you also want to change this to unite so that it's one shape. So now you can see, compared to where we started, I'm going to quickly delete this just so that you can see. Compared to where we started, this has a lot more depth. I'm gonna stop clicking on stuff. Anyway, so we will be doing that same method for all the other shapes. Whoops, I just joined it. There we go. So now I will do that same thing with all my other ones. This one would still have a shadow here that comes down if it's coming in this direction. It would have a shadow here. You can turn off the fill color. You can turn off the fill so that you can see what you're doing. And then continue. If you find that it doesn't match up, you can type Control Z and you can continue drawing once again until you've reached that connection point where it reaches a 0. You will also have a shadow here. So this is when it starts getting interesting, because we have another element in our drawing that we didn't factor in here, and this is a further depth. So before we continue, we want to do two things. One, we want to start showing the angle of the sun. So for here, since this is where our shadow is being casted along this surface, we wouldn't have a straight line. You wouldn't see a straight line. You would see an angle. In this case, ours would be a 45-degree angle, but in other cases, it could be 30, it could be 60. The sun goes high and low in different areas, but you always want to be consistent. So for us, we want this to be a 45-degree angle. So how do we draw a 45-degree angle? We can, if you're skilled, you can do it on your own, or you can make your own guide point. So this square has an arrow, which allows you, if you hold it, to come to line segment. And you can create a line segment that helps you hold and click, and then hold shift. Shift can help you go straight, but it can also help you do an even 45-degree angle. The reason we're drawing this is because this is going to be our guide for when we move this anchor point with the white arrow. So white arrow, we're going to click on this anchor point, click and hold shift to go down. Once we've aligned with this 45-degree that we've created, you can let go of your mouse click. Do not let go of shift, because when you let go of shift, there is no guarantee that it will stay in place. That's why we let go of the mouse first and then let go of shift. That way we can make sure that it stays in the right place. So now we can delete our guide. And now we have a more realistic angle of how the sun would react in that corner. Next, we want to show this depth. So we want to actually fill this. So click and hold. We want to create a rectangle. You can also use the polyline if it's an oblong shape, but for mine it's a square. So I will use the rectangle tool and create a square that fills that space. And then, much like in project 1, when we started showing varying heights with different levels of black and gray, mid, low, mid, light and dark. Sorry, my English. We're going to do that same, but going downward. So the top highest surface will be white. Optimal sunlight, white. As you go further down, it will get darker. So for me, I know that this is deeper than this surface. So what we're going to do is use that same rule of thumb. Click on our fill, click black, but we're going to change K to a deeper level, like one step lower, because it is one step lower from this. So this would be my, let's say, 75. Oh, whoops. My mistake. I was using the wrong one. I want this to stay. And I'm going to change it this way. So it's slightly deeper, but not quite as dark. So you can use 75, 60, something to just show that it's getting darker, but it's not quite there. So it's slightly deeper. So actually, I might go a little higher since it's not as deep as I'm saying it is. At least for my model, always reference your model. For me, and I'm going to turn off this clipping plane, it's deep, but not deeper than half. So instead of 50, I would probably go 30. So let's change that to 30. So it's slightly darker. So now we have this shape and we have this shape. We want to bring it to the front. So we can click Object, Arrange, and bring to front because it's our shadow. Shadow sits on top. So right now it's not looking like much, but when we start applying the same rule of thumb we did for this, any corners, we will join them, unite. So it's one shape. And then we will click, hold shift to select multiple, And then we will change this to black. And then change the opacity roughly 50%, depending. Low res needed. And one more thing that we can do in this instance is create a shadow for here. Since it is deeper, it would also cast a shadow. So now, so that it doesn't just look like a gray rectangle, I will quickly lock what I just did so that I don't get affected. Use the pen tool. Turn off my shading so it doesn't confuse me later. Highlight, unite, fill with black, change the opacity. So this is fine because this would be darker. So now we see the shadow being casted. And we can use this, we can use our eyes to start adjusting the shadow as needed. Because if this shadow comes up to here, this shadow should roughly, click on the point, this shadow would also roughly also sit on that line. It would intersect that line as well because it would be darker. So now you can see with just, we're going to unlock everything. With just adding shadows, I'm going to try to click on just the shadows that I added. So that's 1, that's 2, 3, and 4. When I delete it, it's flat, but when I add it back, it adds more depth to it. You can start seeing the effect of adding shadow to your drawings. And you're gonna start doing that throughout your project. I'm gonna do one more, and I'm gonna do the section. The same rules apply with the plan, but we're gonna do it with the section. Since this is one, actually, let's do the plan. We're gonna do that same rule. Since everything's unlocked, I will lock it again. Object, lock, selection, and we will start adding those same shadows. You might find that the pen tool might start becoming repetitive for you, especially if we're gonna just merge and unite. You can use your rectangle tool and you can start creating these shadows manually. So same thing here, you would have a shadow here. Oops, mess up, Control Z, your best friend. But you would also have a shadow here, because if we refer back to my Rhino file, and this is the best thing to do, if you turn on your clipping plane and turn it back on parallel, you can start seeing where different things are happening. So this is the wrong clipping plane, so we're gonna turn that off and click on the one I actually want. I want this one. So you can start seeing there'll be a shadow here, but there would also be a shadow down here. And this is if the sun is coming from that direction, typically the sun would be coming on top. So you would have a shadow there. So everyone does shadows slightly differently. From top view, it would be going down and you would see that affecting shadow. So for this, I'm still using the sun in this situation. You might find the best way to show your plan or any other view you have is to do it from top. But I'm going to continue with my sun being right here. So I'm going to start, I keep drawing my rectangles. There's no wall here. So that will not be changed. So I'm going to quickly add my shadows. And I will also add my shades. So this would be darker because it's deeper. And this one would also be darker because it's deeper. Before I change their tone, I want to make sure that my shadow's in the front. Select Shift and hold. Object, arrange, bring to front, because they're going to sit on top. And we're going to click on our shade that goes down, fill, use black, and change. In this drawing, it goes down pretty deep, so it would be a lot darker. So 75 is really deep. And this one, it's really shallow. So this one can stay relatively white. And then we go to our shadows, hold Shift to select multiple. We will change this to black. And then we will change our opacity to 50%. So, before we continue, you're going to notice that this is slightly off. Since we don't have a wall here, the shadow casted would also be at that 90 degree because there's nothing stopping it here. The sun is going to keep penetrating through at that 45 degree. So we're going to do that same guideline. We're going to make our 45 degree angle, holding Shift. Do that for both parts. If it's slightly off, you can move it. And then we will use this tool, the white arrow, click on our point. I double click for safety, move it over, hold Shift to stay straight. And when it intersects or is on the line, you can release it. Same thing here, double click the corner, hold Shift, intersects, release. So now when I delete, red, white, black arrow, when I delete these lines, you can see a more realistic shadow showcasing itself on the surface. You might ask, then how come it's not doing it here? Because this is the bottom in this situation. So the reason that you don't have it angled here, because technically, in reality, if this wasn't our boundary line, we would have extended it further. But since we're not surpassing this boundary, you're going to leave it as is. Now the last step for the plan, we're going to unlock, is we're going to poche or color this in black. The reason for the poche is because there is an absence of light in this particular part of our drawing. Since we're cutting through something, that implies that no sun is entering this part of our building or object. It's like cutting through the legs of a table. If you were to look at a leg head on and then look on the inside, there is no light inside the leg of a chair or leg of a table. And that same will apply for walls, floors. They would be darker because there is nothing acting on it. So for here, since we've unlocked it, we can actually, since it made it lines instead of a shape, we would draw on top of it. So I'm going to lock it back. My apologies. We're going to lock it once again and just draw using the polyline on top of our existing shape. This is when our line weights start coming into play because it's very important to show the varying heights. You want your darker line, when it hits 0, it's closed, and we're going to change this stroke to 6. You might see these odd areas. That's because our shadow is sitting on top of the edge of our building. We can quickly change this by going to Object and Arrange and bring to front. We want Object, Arrange, bring to front. Okay. So obviously you don't like me. That's fine. And then because everything's locked, I can't quite bring everything to front because something's there. We'll unlock it. But then on top of that, we are also going to change the fill to black of our shape. Make sure the shape's selected, fill black. So now we also have this one, which is slightly lower, but not as low as the other ones. You would do the same thing. Use the rectangle. But instead of it being black, press X. We're going to press Control Z because that's not what I want. We want to change the stroke to a lighter 3 or 2. And we want our fill to be no fill, but we want the lines. Hold. So now in plan, this is what we're looking at. It might not look like much, but I assure you, it tells more of a story of what you've cut through and the different openings in your model. So follow these tips and tools and continue going around your model, creating these different levels of shade, shadow, and differences within your model. If you run into questions, feel free to ask. Don't forget to add your name, the title block, and have a great day for 2.4.